The summer of 1914, it kicked off with this incredible, almost global delusion.
It's hard to imagine now, isn't it?
Completely. Everyone from the generals in Berlin to the guys signing up in Paris thought this new Great War would be, short.
The famous line was home by Christmas.
Exactly. But that quick, decisive war everyone was banking on, it just never happened.
And our sources for this deep dive really focus in on the precise moment that optimism died. It all points to a single, chaotic, week-long battle. The First Battle of the Marne in September 1914.
It's so much more than just another battle on a map.
Oh, absolutely. It was a pivot point. It fundamentally changed the next 4 years of global history.
Right. So our mission today is to really unpack how this one battle didn't just save Paris, but how it completely shattered Germany's entire opening strategy.
The very reason they thought they could win.
And in doing so, it locked everyone into this bloody, long-term war of attrition. We're tracing the moment the war of movement became a war of stalemate.
A critical transition.
Okay, so let's set the scene. By early September 1914, just how close was the Western Front to total collapse?
The word terrifyingly doesn't quite do it justice. Collapse didn't just seem possible. To many, it looked inevitable. And to get why the stakes were so high, you have to look at the German blueprint.
The Schlieffen Plan, the stuff of legend.
Precisely. It was this massive, high-stakes gamble designed for one thing: to avoid Germany's biggest nightmare.
Fighting on two fronts.
Exactly. A prolonged war against Russia in the east and France in the west. The thinking was, well, pretty simple on paper. Russia would take at least 6 weeks to get its huge army ready.
So Germany had a 6-week window to knock France out of the war completely.
That was the plan. And the method for this knockout blow was, almost architectural.
A swinging door, right.
A giant swinging door. The smaller German left wing would be the hinge, holding the line down near Alsace-Lorraine. Meanwhile, the massive right wing, 5 full armies, would just sweep through neutral Belgium.
Bypassing all the heavy French forts on the border.
And then pivot south and west, loop around Paris, and trap the entire French army against that hinge. War over in 40 days.
And for a while it was working. The sources make it clear the momentum was just relentless.
Frighteningly so.
By the first days of September, they'd smashed through Belgium, chewed up northern France, and were closing in on the capital.
They were so close, the most advanced German soldiers were standing just 30 miles from Paris.
That's about 50 kilometers. Today that's a quick drive.
And what's really fascinating is that the speed of their own success was becoming a fatal flaw.
How so?
The troops were just completely exhausted. They were marching up to 40 kilometers a day on foot, and they'd literally outrun their own supplies.
So you have soldiers at the gates of Paris, but their food, their ammunition.
It's hundreds of miles behind them, stuck on a wrecked Belgian rail network. The plan was not just ambitious, it was logistically fragile.
So it was all resting on the French breaking now.
Absolutely. The German high command needed that collapse to happen immediately. They were already getting nervous about Russia mobilizing faster than expected and were shifting troops east.
So the threat to Paris wasn't just symbolic.
It was everything. It was the entire German framework for victory. If Paris fell, French political leadership, industry, morale, it all goes with it.
Okay, so the French and the British are in full retreat, the Great Retreat. The government even abandons Paris for Bordeaux. It really looks like the war is lost.
It does.
So how do you go from that kind of existential panic to launching a winning counterattack just a few days later?
Well, this is where the human element becomes so critical. And that element is the French commander-in-chief, Joseph Joffre.
The man who held it all together.
He's described in our sources as being just unflappably calm in the middle of total chaos. While his generals were panicking, Joffre was reorganizing.
On the move, while retreating.
Yes, and he was ruthless about it. He fired something like 20 incompetent or wavering generals in August alone. He was restoring discipline even as they were falling back.
That's incredible leadership, but just being organized doesn't create a military opportunity. Where did the opening come from?
It actually came from the Germans themselves, specifically from the commander of their First Army on the far right of the advance, General von Kluck.
What did he do?
The original plan, the Schlieffen Plan, called for him to sweep far to the west of Paris to get that deep encirclement.
The big swinging arc.
Right. But his men were exhausted, he was still fighting the British, and he saw the French forces retreating to the southeast. He thought he could finish them off quickly.
So instead of going around Paris, he cuts inside. He turns east of the city.
Correct. And in making that turn, he inadvertently exposes his entire right flank. He pulls away from the German Second Army to his left, and this creates a massive 50-kilometer wide gap between them.
A giant hole in the German line.
A hole pointing directly at the French forces still defending Paris.
And that is the aha moment, the classic military blunder born from overconfidence.
And Joffre saw it instantly. On September 6th, he ordered the counterattack. The French 6th Army, full of fresh troops from the Paris garrison, smashed right into that exposed German flank.
And this is where that famous story comes from, right? The taxis?
The taxis of the Marne, yes. It's a fantastic symbol of the moment. To rush reinforcements to the front, the military governor of Paris commandeered, well, every taxi in the city.
So you have thousands of soldiers being ferried to a battle in Parisian taxicabs.
It wasn't the main reason they got there. Most went by rail. But it was an incredible display of national will, and it just shows the improvisation that was needed.
It's the perfect image of this old world war colliding with the new industrial one.
It really is.
So how did the German command react when their flank suddenly gets hit so hard?
With panic, basically. Their command structure was a mess. Communications were awful. When von Kluck's First Army suddenly had to turn and fight the French Sixth Army, the German High Command realized their whole advance was at risk of being encircled themselves.
Their swinging door was about to be ripped right off the hinge.
That's a perfect way to put it. The German commander-in-chief, Moltke, was miles away in Luxembourg, totally out of touch. He sent a staff officer, a Lieutenant Colonel Hensch, to figure out what was going on.
And what did Hensch find?
Confusion, collapsing lines, and panicked commanders. He made the call on the spot. He ordered the First and Second Armies to pull back, to retreat to the Aisne River.
So this wasn't some strategic withdrawal. This was a desperate move to stop the bleeding.
It was an emergency break, a failure of command under extreme pressure. And for the Allies, the success was immediate. Between September 6th and the 12th, they pushed the Germans back about 45 miles.
70 kilometers.
70 kilometers away from Paris. And just like that, the immediate threat to the capital was over. And so was the Schlieffen Plan.
Which brings us right to the core of this deep dive. Why do the sources frame this as the moment that saved France? The war went on for 4 more brutal years.
Because saving France in this context wasn't about winning the war outright. It was about ensuring France could continue to fight the war. The real victory was in causing a total strategic failure for Germany. By forcing that retreat, the battle it vaporized any realistic chance of a quick German victory in 1914. That one core assumption of their entire strategy was gone.
And that immediately throws Germany into its worst-case scenario.
The two-front war they dreaded. Without a quick win in the West, they now had to split their armies, their resources, their attention to fight a massive war with Russia. It guaranteed they could never again concentrate enough force in the West for another knockout blow.
And on a practical level, what did keeping Paris mean for the Allies?
It was crucial. Think about the infrastructure. If Paris had fallen, the French government would have been paralyzed. But more importantly, all the key war industries, the factories, the rail hubs.
They would have been captured.
Exactly. Because the line held at the Marne, France's government and its industrial heart could keep functioning. It allowed them to fully mobilize for the long war ahead.
And the sources also talk about the symbolism, the morale boost. This became the miracle of the Marne.
Oh, it was huge for morale.
Yeah.
It turned the narrative from a catastrophic retreat into a story of national defiance. Now, historians can debate whether the Germans would have actually besieged Paris, but the strategic result is undeniable.
The German momentum was broken.
And the initiative, for the first time, passed to the Allies.
So the Marne decides that Germany can't win quickly. What does that mean for the next 4 years? We always think of World War I as trenches, trenches, trenches. Is this where that begins?
This is the exact moment it begins. The German retreat to the Aisne River is what transforms the war. Once they dug in there, both sides realized something fundamental.
That you couldn't just punch through the enemy's line anymore.
The defensive technology was just too powerful. The machine gun, the rapid-fire artillery, they gave a massive advantage to the defender.
So if you can't go forward,
you have to go around. And that set off what's known as the race to the sea.
Both sides trying to outflank each other.
Constantly. Desperately trying to restore that war of movement. They just kept extending their lines further and further north, trying to get around the other guys in before they reached the English Channel.
Which, ironically, created the very opposite of a war of movement.
It created a total stalemate. They literally ran out of map. The trench lines finally hit the North Sea coast, and suddenly you had this continuous, unbroken front.
From Switzerland all the way to the sea.
And that is the image of World War I. that we all know. The Battle of the Marne is what locked that reality into place. It ensured the war would be a horrifying test of industrial attrition, of economic endurance.
A war that nobody was actually prepared to fight in 1914.
Instead of the short, sharp victory Germany had planned.
That's such a critical distinction. The Marne was decisive not because it destroyed the German army, but because it dictated the kind of war this was going to be.
Long, attritional, and just. Utterly exhausting. It bought the Allies the time they desperately needed.
So it's rightly celebrated as the battle that saved Paris and kept France in the fight. But when you look at what came next, I mean, the immediate result was the deadlock of the trenches.
Exactly. And that, I think, leaves a really important question for you to think about. When is salvation simply the replacement of one catastrophe, a swift defeat, with another, much more prolonged catastrophe, in this case, 4 years of industrial slaughter?
A tough question.
That static front, born from the success at the Marne, became this profound, unintended monument to a very, very complicated victory.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So we are setting the scene today in the blistering, terrifying opening weeks of 1914.
Right.
The entire German military strategy, really their whole war effort, it all rested on one single, brilliant, but brutal idea. The Schlieffen Plan.
It was the ultimate gamble, wasn't it? Logistically, strategically. The plan was designed to deliver this incredibly swift knockout blow in the West.
Crush France in 6 weeks.
Exactly. Crush France and then free up all your resources to turn around and face Russia.
Yeah.
The main goal was avoiding the German general staff's greatest nightmare.
A two-front war.
A long, grinding two-front war.
And as we all know, the plan failed. I mean, it failed spectacularly. It completely shattered in the first week of September 1914, just miles outside of Paris at the Battle of the Marne. We've got a fantastic stack of source material here, and our mission for this deep dive isn't just to, recount the battle. We want to specifically dissect the German failures.
Precisely. We're tracing the fault lines.
Yeah.
Because what the sources make really clear is that this wasn't just one moment of bad luck or one catastrophic decision by a field marshal.
Oh.
It was a perfect, fatal combination of strategic flaws, compounding operational misjudgments, and just a complete breakdown of command and coordination. That's what derailed the entire blueprint.
And the big reveal here, the reason this one failure at the Marne is so important is that it definitively ended any hope of a quick victory.
Yeah, that was it.
It locked Germany into the exact nightmare scenario they had tried so hard to avoid, a brutal, protracted war of attrition that would bleed them dry for the next 4 years.
To really get it, you have to start with the concept itself.
Yeah.
The Schlieffen Plan was just fatally rigid. It demanded a kind of flawless execution that, almost no military operation in history has ever achieved.
It was built on huge over-optimism.
Immense strategic over-optimism.
It's like building a skyscraper on sand. And what's really remarkable is how many of these critical, non-negotiable assumptions just turned out to be completely false within weeks.
We can basically pull out 3 core false assumptions that put the German armies under strain right away.
Okay.
First, they assumed Belgian resistance would be weak. They thought they'd just stroll through Belgium to get to the French flank.
Yeah.
Instead, the Belgian army resisted fiercely. It delayed their whole timetable and forced them into these costly, unforeseen battles right at the start.
And that delay was critical. But the other 2 points really bought the Allies the time they needed, didn't they?
They absolutely did. So, second, the Germans were banking heavily on Russia, mobilizing slowly. They figured they had a full 6 weeks before the Eastern Front would become a serious problem.
But Russia mobilized way faster than they expected.
Far faster. And that forced the German High Command Moltke, the chief of staff, it forced him to make these painful decisions to redeploy troops to the east, draining resources from the main effort in the west.
And then there were the British.
Yes. Third, they just didn't anticipate serious British involvement. They didn't think the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, would get back into the fight so quickly after the initial retreat.
They certainly didn't expect them to be in a position to hit a weak spot in their line near Paris.
Not within a matter of days. So all 3 of those assumptions proved fundamentally wrong, and it stretched their army and their timetable from day one.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Let's talk about where the plan failed physically, because a strategy only works if the soldiers can actually do what's asked of them. The human and logistical toll here was immense.
Oh, it was huge. The plan demanded absolutely massive marching distances for that crucial right wing, the hammer that was supposed to swing around Paris.
We're talking about men marching, 20, 30 miles a day?
Every single day, for weeks on end. And this was without the kind of rail support that the original Schlieffen concept had actually envisioned.
It's a classic case of 20th century warfare hitting 19th century logistics.
Exactly. And you see the immediate physical results of that overreach in the sources. The formations were beyond exhausted.
I've read accounts of troops literally sleeping while marching.
It happened. And that kind of physical breakdown, it impacts everything. Tactical judgment suffers, discipline wavers, and the crucial speed of the whole advance slows down.
And the supply lines.
Dangerously overextended. Ammunition, food, and crucially timely communication with Moltke's high command, which was hundreds of miles away in Luxembourg. It all became unreliable just when they needed it most.
So the forces are exhausted, and exhaustion leads to poor judgment, which I think brings us directly to Moltke's first big operational mistake, weakening the hammer.
This is such a critical point. The entire Schlieffen concept relied on one thing. Overwhelming strength on that crucial right wing to envelop Paris. But Moltke fundamentally violated that core principle.
Now wait, to be fair, he was under immense pressure from the east with Russia mobilizing so fast. Was reinforcing other sectors truly a mistake, or was it a forced compromise?
It was a compromise that became a catastrophic mistake. Under pressure, he weakened his own hammer. He detached several army corps to reinforce East Prussia and the Central Front.
So he took vital pieces out of the engine.
Yeah, he essentially did. He chipped away at the very strength needed to pull off that massive wheeling maneuver around Paris.
The strategic strength is diluted.
Okay, now let's get down to the operational blunder on the ground that turned this struggling advance into a fatal one. The coordination between the First and Second Armies.
What's so fascinating here is how close they came and how a seemingly minor geographic misstep created a strategic catastrophe.
So you have the First Army under General von Kluck on the absolute far right, the tip of the spear.
Right. And next to him is the Second Army under General von Bülow.
And Kluck was aggressively chasing what he thought was a defeated French army, right?
That was his thinking. He saw the French retreating, and he decided to turn southeast across the Marne River to pursue them. He was hoping for a massive local victory.
But in doing so, he moved ahead of Bülow's Second Army, way ahead. And that directly violated Moltke's strict instruction from September 5th to maintain alignment, to maintain mutual support.
This sounds like a simple navigation error, but for anyone listening and trying to picture this, why was moving ahead of your neighbor so deadly?
Because it created a vacuum. It was like two hands trying to clap, but Kluck's hand moved too fast and too far inward, leaving this gaping, rapidly widening hole where their palms should have met.
A massive, unpatrolled gap.
A huge gap. We're talking about a void of roughly 30 to 50 kilometers. I mean, the width of a small county.
And this wasn't some hidden vulnerability the Allies had to guess at. It was. It was a visible invitation for attack.
Precisely. French aerial reconnaissance spotted that massive hole almost immediately. They could literally see a seam in the German line with no troops connecting those two huge armies.
And General Joffre, the French commander, he didn't hesitate.
Wasted no time. He immediately targeted it, directing fresh troops from the French 6th Army and the recovering British Expeditionary Force right into that breach.
So the troops are exhausted, the right wing's been weakened, and now there's this massive operational gap being exploited. Let's move up the chain and talk about the ultimate breakdown, the collapse of centralized command.
This raises a question that, still echoes today. What happens when central management just loses visibility? The sources are clear that Moltke's headquarters, so far away, severely lack timely information from the front.
Right. These armies are moving fast, and communication is relying on, field telephone wires, couriers?
Sometimes just sheer luck.
It's a classic problem. Once you lose visibility, you lose control. Moltke was basically managing a crisis blind, unable to coherently direct millions of men hundreds of miles away.
And the crisis got so bad that the authority to make the most decisive decision of the campaign fell to, the unlikeliest of people.
A liaison officer.
A mere liaison officer.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Tell us about Richard Hensch.
Richard Hensch was Moltke's personal liaison. He was sent on a mission to just assess the situation on that deteriorating right flank.
And what did he find?
He found commanders already retreating or getting ready to. They were under heavy pressure from the Allied counterattack. And in the absence of any clear, coherent order from a distant high command.
Hensch ended up making the call.
He ended up exercising decisive authority. He basically just rubber-stamped and ordered the ultimate withdrawal of the armies.
The fact that the most critical order of the opening campaign, an order that literally determined the length of the war, was basically issued by a colonel, that just underscores how fragmented German command had become.
It's incredible. No general wanted to take the blame, so the man with the most current, if bleak information, got to make the call.
And while this high-level confusion was happening, Kluck was still making tactical errors on the ground.
He was, and they were only making that operational gap even worse.
What was his final tactical misjudgment?
Well, it connects back to his pursuit. Kluck was so focused on beating the French forces east of Paris that he turned his open flank right toward the city.
Where the French Sixth Army was waiting?
Exactly. And to try and protect this newly exposed flank, he started stripping units from Bülow's side, which only lengthened that vulnerable gap he'd already created.
So he's trying to solve a strategic problem with a tactical move that just completely backfired.
And underlying all of these errors was a massive intelligence failure. I mean, a real failure to respect the enemy's resilience.
Right. They just assumed the French were beaten.
Absolutely. German intelligence had severely underestimated the French capacity to regroup and mount a coherent counterattack. They also failed to anticipate the BEF's ability to get back into the fight so quickly and effectively.
They weren't prepared for the strength or the timing of the Allied counteroffensive.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They treated the enemy as beaten when they were really just reforming.
So if we pull all of this together for you listening, you have the physical exhaustion of the troops, the supply strain, the weakened hammer, the exposed flanks, and that disastrous coordination failure. The German right wing was just left completely unable to sustain any offensive momentum when that Allied counterblow came.
The advance had simply run out of steam and out of coherence. The culmination of all these compounding mistakes it made any continued offensive impossible.
The decision had to be made.
And it was, by Moltke, based on the reports Hensch brought back, to break off the offensive completely.
And we should be clear, this wasn't just a decision to pause and regroup, this was an order for a full pullback.
It was. The order was to abandon the pursuit and retreat to a defensible line along the Aisne River. That single action changed the entire war.
It turned an overextended advance into an enforced, strategically devastating retreat.
And that decision definitively ended the Schlieffen Plan. The dream of a quick victory was officially over.
So what does this all mean when we look back at the Marne? For you, the learner processing this deep dive, the failure wasn't a single moment of heroism by the Allies.
Though they certainly fought bravely.
Of course. Or singular incompetence by one German general. It was a perfect systemic failure. The strategic overreach of the original plan collided with critical operational missteps and a catastrophic communication breakdown.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the whole reason for the Schlieffen Plan was speed. To win before the West could fully organize, they sacrificed everything for that speed.
They demanded perfection, which in war is impossible.
And yet they allowed exhaustion, political pressure, and operational friction to create a simple coordination gap of 30 to 50 kilometers.
A gap that was immediately exploited.
What does it say about the military leadership of that time that they allowed this one small physical distance to be the primary cause of a 4-year global conflict? What stands out to you as the single most critical point of failure in this entire tragic chain?
That's a moment worth mulling over.
Indeed.
A profound question we'll leave you with. We will see you next time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in, well, a single terrifying week in military history.
A week that really defined the First World War.
Exactly. Think September 1914. The French and British armies are reeling backward in what history calls the Great Retreat.
And Paris was effectively undefended. The German Schlieffen Plan, their whole strategy for a quick victory, it looked like it was moments away from success.
It was a full-blown crisis. You have a situation where entire nations are, preparing for surrender just weeks into the war.
But that wasn't the outcome, and it was averted, really, by one man, French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre. He took this collapsing front and, in just 48 hours, completely turned it around.
And masterminded the counteroffensive we now know as the First Battle of the Marne.
That's the one.
So our mission today isn't just to retell the story of the Marne, it's to really dissect Joffre's organizational genius.
Right. This victory wasn't about having better guns or more men overall. It was about superior management, plain and simple.
We're looking at the strategy, the logistics, the sheer force of will, and the single glaring vulnerability in the German plan that Joffre spotted and exploited instantly.
We've been deep in the reports looking at how he reorganized his command, how he used France's amazing railway system to shift entire armies from east to west.
A blindingly fast maneuver.
Incredibly fast. And how he had to convince his own hesitant allies to commit to what, frankly, looked like a suicide attack. This deep dive is really about the operational art that saved Paris.
Okay, so let's unpack this. You have a retreating army. They're physically and mentally exhausted.
Their morale is shot.
Completely. The Great Retreat has been going on since late August.
Yeah.
So what was the first thing Joffrey had to do to just regain control of the situation?
His first step was, well, it was radical, almost brutal, actually. He had to stabilize the command structure.
Yep.
He realized that the panic infecting the troops, it was starting at the top. So he initiated what historians politely call a cleanup.
A cleanup. What does that mean in practice?
It means the immediate wholesale sacking of over a dozen generals.
Wow.
Yeah. Generals who were exhausted, ineffective, or just couldn't handle the sheer pace of this new kind of war. He just fired them.
But Joffrey was known as Papa Joffrey, this calm, sort of grandfatherly figure. This sounds ruthless.
It was ruthless, and it was a huge jolt to the system. It was absolutely meant to be.
So it wasn't just operational, it was psychological.
It was a signal to everyone, from a private on the front line to the highest army commander, that failure was no longer an option and accountability was immediate.
And by replacing them with leaders he trusted, like Fauché d'Espèrey for the crucial Fifth Army.
He immediately improved cohesion on that western flank, the flank that was the main German target. It was less about military doctrine and more about, psychological warfare aimed at his own officers.
That makes a lot of sense. If you need a rapid counteroffensive, you need commanders thinking ahead, not ones who are shell-shocked. And a huge part of that reorganization involved leveraging France's infrastructure. We hear this term, the power of interior lines. How did Joffrey turn French geography into an advantage?
This is where his genius really shines. So the German plan, the Schlieffen Plan, it required their armies to execute this massive sweeping wheeling motion.
Right, come around in a huge arc to bypass Paris.
Exactly, a huge external arc, but that's slow. It puts incredible strain on their supply lines, on their men who are marching constantly.
They're essentially walking the perimeter.
They are. Meanwhile, Joffrey has access to the dense, centralized French railway network, the interior lines.
Which lets him move troops straight across the middle.
It lets him pull entire army corps from the quiet eastern sectors where they weren't facing the main German push and shuttle them rapidly west towards Paris.
It's like having a high-speed train system while your enemy is stuck on country roads.
That's a great way to put it. And the scale of this was immense. He was moving hundreds of thousands of men, artillery, supplies, all in a matter of days.
I can't even imagine the logistic.
It was so effective that he basically created an entirely new fighting force out of thin air, the new Sixth Army under General Monnery. And he placed it right on the flank north of Paris.
So creating Monnery's Sixth Army completely changed the balance of power. But for all this reorganization, they were still retreating. There had to be a trigger, some piece of intelligence that made him say, okay, stop, we attack now.
There was. And the trigger was pulled on September 4th. It was a total intelligence coup.
How'd it come in?
This is where new technology completely disrupts old warfare. The information came from aerial reconnaissance, from pilots in these early rickety observation planes.
These were fragile little things, barely faster than a car.
But they gave Joffrey a view of the battlefield no general in history had ever had before.
What did they see?
They saw that the German First Army, under General von Kluck, was not continuing its wide arc around Paris.
Okay.
Instead, in a rush to chase the French Fifth Army, Kluck had made a cardinal sin. He wheeled inside the planned arc, turning southeast right towards the Marne River.
And what did that overzealous move create?
It created a yawning 50-kilometer gap between his First Army and the German Second Army next to it.
50 kilometers? That's not a crack, that's a highway.
It's a highway straight into the German rear. Their entire right flank was just hanging in the air, totally exposed. They'd moved so fast they'd completely lost contact and cohesion.
So their own speed outran their ability to communicate.
Exactly. They were victims of their own ambition. And Joffrey saw this intelligence, and he understood instantly this was the moment. The retreat had to stop. The attack had to begin.
So he gets this intelligence on September 4th. How quickly does he act?
almost instantaneously. General Instruction Num. 5 was issued that same day, September 4th.
And the order was?
Simple, blunt. The retreat ceases, the attack begins on September 6th.
That's a 48-hour window.
Yeah.
From getting the intel to launching a multi-army counterattack, that's staggering.
It shows just how clear his command was, especially when you compare it to the fractured German general staff at the time.
But pulling that off, it's more than just sending a memo, right? What were the big challenges in actually getting this coordinated attack off the ground?
Two huge ones. First, he needed total cooperation from the military governor of Paris, General Gallieni.
Who's technically independent of Joffrey's command.
Right. And his job was to defend the city itself. But he was also protecting that new 6th Army, Monnery's forces, which were sticking their neck out north of the Marne.
And Gallieni's urgency is where we get one of the most famous stories of the war.
The taxes of the Marne, exactly. He requisitioned Parisian taxicabs to rush about 6,000 reserve infantrymen to the front. It was a small number strategically, but it shows the desperation and the critical need for that coordination.
A wonderful piece of color. But the second challenge was even bigger. Getting the British on board.
Securing the commitment of the British Expeditionary Force. That was maybe the biggest political gamble Joffrey took.
Because they were battered. They'd been retreating for weeks.
They'd suffered immensely. Their commander, Sir John French, was reluctant to go on the offensive again. Some sources even suggest he was suffering from shell shock and was ready to pull back entirely.
So how do you convince a shell-shocked ally who isn't even under your command to join a massive, high-stakes attack?
Joffrey made a personal, unscheduled visit to Sir John French, and he didn't issue orders. He made a direct, personal appeal. Almost a challenge, really.
What did he say?
He basically laid out the situation, emphasized the moral and strategic need to hit that gap now before the Germans could fix their mistake. That personal touch, that was the diplomatic turning point.
Wow.
Without the BEF pushing right into the center of that gap, the whole thing would have likely stalled.
So that one conversation sealed the deal. And with everyone on board, what did this create on the battlefield? Did he actually manufacture the local superiority he needed?
He did. And it was all thanks to that interior line movement. The plan put 191 French and British battalions up against the German First Army's 128.
That's a crushing local advantage.
An advantage he had literally transported and created in that specific spot just to exploit Kluck's mistake.
Okay, so let's get to the execution. The attack kicks off on September 6th. Which armies are driving straight into that 50-kilometer gap?
You have the French 5th Army, the French 9th Army holding the center, and crucially, the newly committed BEF. Their mission was simple: drive a wedge deep into the center and paralyze the German command.
Separate Kluck's 1st Army from Bülow's 2nd.
Precisely.
And what was the immediate tactical impact? How does a gap that size affect the German ability to fight?
The effect was instant and catastrophic for them. The Allied advance sliced right through their communication lines.
So they couldn't coordinate?
Not at all. Imagine trying to give orders between two huge armies when the line connecting you is under enemy fire. It also jeopardized their entire supply and reinforcement routes.
So their advances stalled, their flanks are open, their comms are cut. What was the reaction at German High Command?
Panic, followed by the decision that sealed the failure of the Schlieffen Plan. The Chief of Staff, von Moltke, saw the threat of encirclement, that they could lose the entire German First Army.
And he had to act.
On September 9th, he ordered a general retreat.
The Great Retreat was officially over. It was now the Great German Retreat.
That's it. Their forces fell back 65 kilometers north to the Aisne River, and that's where they dug in.
The beginning of trench warfare.
The definitive end of the Mobile War on the Western Front. But Joffrey's victory was absolute. Paris was saved. The Allied cause was preserved.
So when we step back from the mud and the maneuvers of the Marne, what's the key takeaway for you listening to this?
For me, it's that Joffrey won this pivotal battle by just using the tools available to him in the most decisive way possible.
It's a masterclass in modern command.
Totally. He uses new tech like aerial reconnaissance. He leverages existing infrastructure, the railways, to create overwhelming local superiority. And he showed unwavering leadership.
He fired who he needed to fire and personally secured his alliance.
It wasn't a victory of a better bayonet charge. It was a victory of management over raw momentum.
And it all hinged on that one mistake, that 50-kilometer gap. I mean, if the clouds had been too low that day, if that reconnaissance flight had been grounded,
or if Joffrey had hesitated for just 48 hours, the Germans might have closed the gap, and the history of the 20th century could look completely different.
Which raises a really important question for you to think about.
Yeah. We talk about these massive strategic plans, like the Schlieffen Plan, designed over years, but its failure hinged on a tiny error and one leader's ability to act on an unforeseen opportunity instantly.
So how often is the difference between disaster and success not the plan itself?
But the speed and the resolve with which a leader reacts to unexpected intelligence.
Something to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us on this pivotal moment in military history.